the super rich, not just in the US, but also in Europe, wanting to pay more taxes to help save their ailing economies. And I want to bring in a new factor into this debate now. Here in France, the latest statistical data shows that inequalities have worsened. The economic crisis of 2008 has pushed more people below the poverty line. There are now over 8 million poor people here in France. That's 13.5% of the population. So we're going to look at a France 24 report that gives you the latest facts and the latest figures.
Whether in the streets or the woods, in shelters or in modest homes, the ranks of the poor are growing. 1 in 8 people in France is poor. In 2008, 7.8 million people were living below the poverty line, that is, with less than 954 euros a month. In 2009, that number rose to 8.2 million, or 13.5% of the population, up from 13% the year before. Poverty has hit workers too. 8% of them are living below the poverty line. Among the unemployed, that number more than doubled to almost 17%.
In 2009, during the economic crisis, unemployment rose generally, but it rose more rapidly among people on low income.
Pensioners haven't been spared either. 1 in 10 is considered poor. The gap between the poor and the wealthy continues to grow. Whereas the 10% at the bottom of the pay scale earn just over 10,000 euros a year, the top 10% earn 3.5 times that, just over 35,000 euros a year. The French average salary rose slightly to just over 19,000 euros per year. Among the poor who are employed, the figures could have been worse. Low-wage earners receive government assistance to top up their income.
Okay, so what we see is on the one hand, we have the rich in the US and in Europe saying, hey, you've been going easy on us. We can actually pay more. Tax us more, please. We're going to help the economy. And on the other hand, this latest data shows us that the poor have been getting poorer. Now, we're going to be discussing this with our guests, Tariq Mouakil, who's an economist. You're an author of a book called Asset Markets, Portfolio Choice, and Macroeconomic Activity. Thanks for being with us. We have Craig Kapitas as well, a senior writer for Bloomberg News, who's on set. And via satellite link from Brussels, we have Sony Kapoor, managing director of Redefine, an international think tank on reforming the financial system. Thanks, Sony, for joining us from Brussels. And David Logan, of course, an economist for the non-partisan think tank Tax Foundation that's based in Washington. Thank you all for being here. And I want to put that first question to David. David, it's a naive question, but do you think that's normal? The rich are saying, you've been going easy on us. Our tax rates have actually decreased dramatically over the last 20 to 30 years. And now we're discovering the poor are actually getting poorer.
Do I think it's normal? Absolutely not. Put bluntly, I do not have the exact figures, but I had a reporter pose me the question earlier this week. You know, why is there a very conspicuous absence of billionaires who are saying, wait a second, Warren Buffett doesn't speak for all of us. Recently, we've seen Steve Forbes come out and say he doesn't speak for all of us. But you can see why that would be the case. And my guess is no one wants to be the bad guy when it comes to tax policy, especially if you're living a very comfortable life, one that you've likely earned, but especially during an anemic economy in the recession that we're experiencing. Do I think Mr. Buffett's comments are indicative of the general feelings of people making more than $1 million? Absolutely not. It's true that there has been a trend that the rich have paid lower effective tax rates, like I said. But in the U.S., the lowest earners actually pay negative taxes. In fact, about 46 to 50%, depending on whose data you look at. Those taxpayers don't pay any income tax in our country. So, the burden is very heavily shouldered by the top 1% who pay more in taxes than the bottom 90% of taxpayers combined.
Well, yet here in France, the top 10% of earners are in 2009, after the beginning of the economic crisis, they earned more. Whereas the bottom 10% of earners, they didn't they didn't just earn more at a lower rate. They actually earned less. Their standard of living decreased. So on the one hand, you have more and more billionaires, and on the other hand, the poor actually have less money in 2009 than they had in 2008. And the question I want to ask Tariq Muakil is, do you feel that taxes should be used in this respect to redistribute wealth and prevent this income gap and these inequalities from increasing?
I think so, but I want to add that when you think about fairness of tax system, of course you can think of a progressive tax system, like where richest people pay a higher share of their income than people who have less money. But some of my colleagues might think that a flat rate where all people pay the same rate is a fair tax system. But if you look, for instance, at the tax system in the US or the tax system in France,
everybody paying the same percentage of taxes.
No, they're slightly progressive actually. So until you reach the 3% of people the richest, they're slightly progressive. So they are very. You might say they're very fair. They're fair tax system. Not very fair, but they're fair tax system. But when you reach the 3%, the 3% richest people in the economy, the tax structure becomes regressive. This means that in the US or in France, the 3% of people, the 3% richest people in the economy, pay, the share of the income that they pay is less than the share of the income paid by people who have less money. So you have a tax system that creates inequalities.
Another naive question: is that wrong? Craig, I'm sure you have an opinion on that.
No, Tariq and I will agree on that type of system is in all likelihood the best and the fairest way to do it. But let's go back to this 13.5%, 8.2 million people in poverty. This is
in one of the richest countries in the world.
It's tragic. It's tragic. But that study didn't, people who did that study, I'm sure, will not be able to answer the follow-up question here. Why is that the case? Was it because people weren't paying enough taxes, or was it due to the mismanagement of the funds that the government has been taking from taxpayers for however many years to administer these types of programs? Wealth. The concept of wealth is individual to everyone. What do you need to get by, and when
just a note to our viewers: the poverty line in France is defined as 954 euros. So 13.5% of the French population are earning below 954 euros.
Right, and there are, I guarantee you, there are a lot more reasons for that than just people not paying what others believe is a fair amount of tax. In fact, that particular reason is probably at the very bottom of the list if you wanted to do the study. What was interesting in this discussion is what you had Attali saying before, talking about global governance. That is he's right. That's the only reason.
He was saying the world is heading towards a global depression. He was saying,
yes.
not recession, depression.
Depression, and that global governance was a solution. This is something we've heard at Davos for many years, and everyone runs for cover when they hear it, because no nation on this earth, including France or the United States, is going to give up any of its sovereignty or freedoms of its people for some kind of ad hoc global governing body or regulations that are administered by a global governing body such as the United Nations, which is still the laughingstock of many countries in the world, including the United States. So what you have here is, as I said before, the whole tax, it's very easy to fall into the trap of blaming rich people for this current situation.
All right, but hold on. Some of these rich people, let's take the case of Maurice Lévy, who wrote an article in the French press. He's one of the richest men in France. He's the CEO of the third largest advertising company in the world, Publicis. He actually says, we rich people, we need for a limited amount of time to pay more taxes to help the economy get back on track.
I'm sorry, you said he was the head of what?
The third, Publicis, the third largest advertising company.
Aren't they also in the public relations business?
They're
and it's very easy for these people to say it, as I think David in Washington was pointing out. You don't see billionaires rallying around the flagpole on this. It's pure and simple politics and convenience for them to say this. In my
Be
opinion,
that as it may, France is actually going to pick them up on that suggestion, and they're imposing a 3% tax on people who are earning
it's a
$500,000
very nice political lever to push that'll help get votes. It's going to bring Sarkozy votes.
Let's speak to Sony Kapoor again. Sony, you're the MD for a think tank that thinks about reforming the financial system. Would you essentially agree with Craig that this tax lever is more of a political ploy than a real economic tool to use when you're trying to fight inequalities?
On that particular point of the current debate and what's been going on, I very partly agree that at least part of the statements have been to do with PR. But on almost everything else he said, I completely disagree. And I'm afraid he has a very distorted picture of how the world works and what society and civilization are. Taxes are the price we pay for civilized society. None of these billionaires in France would actually be around or would be billionaires if France did not have the infrastructure. France has state-of-the-art infrastructure, excellent education, and a reasonably high standard of living, which is what allowed these people to earn their wealth. You need infrastructure, and the state has provided it. And as to the question of global governance, the European Union, I know it's having its serious problems, and I'm a critic of the current policies, but it is a very successful example of pooled sovereignty. And what we need is, and going back to my question of the tax avoidance and evasion debate, what we have had is countries free riding on others. If the way you earn your money as Liechtenstein is to actually allow and facilitate other citizens of other countries to evade their taxes, that needs to be tackled. And the downside is that for every 100,000 euros that Liechtenstein earns through this, the tax losses that it inflicts on other more legitimate economies and welfare states is actually an order of magnitude higher. We're talking at least 10 to 20 times. So this is very, very inefficient. We need, at the very least, for example, a global agreement, international agreement, starting with the EU and then going internationally, to make sure that these jurisdictions are not able to make legislation exclusively targeted at allowing citizens and companies to violate the laws of their own countries.
So you're essentially saying that, yes, the rich should be taxed more. Not only that, but legislations across the board, across the world, should all be harmonized and brought to the same level, such that the rich can't just choose to go and live in another country where they'll pay less tax.
No. That's not what I'm saying. You don't need to actually harmonize legislation, but what you do need is you need to stop, as Liechtenstein, deliberately targeting and marketing, or as UBS did in the United States, US citizens, and saying, come to us, we will help you avoid your legal obligations in the United States. What is the point of being a citizen if what you are doing as a country is making a living out of doing things which are illegal in several other countries? But my bigger point here is that this is an interesting and important debate, what the super rich are saying, and that will bring some tax revenue. But a much bigger pool of resources lies untaxed in tax havens, and Britain and Germany and France are taking some steps to get some of that money back. But the even bigger question is the structure of the tax system. And on that, I think I might agree with some of the stuff that Craig says, that we need a system where tax burden needs to shift much more to economically unproductive activities. So we need tax on unproductive assets, for example, housing wealth, and lower taxes on employment generation and social contributions. We need taxes on things that have negative externalities. We need more greenhouse taxes. We possibly need taxes on financial transactions that are excessively risky and contributed to the collapse of the world economy. And we need perhaps fewer taxes on some of the corporate investments. So
what you're saying, Sony, in essence, is that we need taxes to a tax system that will stimulate economic growth.
Yes, a tax system that is at the same time both fair and is much more aligned with an incentive structure that stimulates growth. And right now we have a tax system that does not do that. And these are compatible goals.
David Logan in Washington, you work for the think tank that advises on tax systems. What is a tax system that that stimulates economic growth? And if there is such a thing, then how come countries don't seem to be rushing to adopt that system, or do they already have it?
Well, no, we certainly don't already have it. I would think that certainly you have to look at different institutions across the EU, the United States, Canada. We all have different institutional regulatory bodies and such that make the nuances of all of our tax codes much different. I think that, and I have to say in response to a couple of remarks of Sony's, financial transactions taxes, if you've surveyed the literature at all, it's very evenly handed. There's a very good case for them. There's a very good case against them, and so most economists would say that it doesn't make any sense. People of very prominent economists have come to polarizing conclusions. Second is about tax havens. When we're talking about tax havens, why do they exist? Economists, we all deal with incentives, and I think that the incentive for a place like Liechtenstein or Switzerland to even exist as a tax haven is a result of poorly structured tax structures in each economy. Without bad tax structure, they wouldn't have to exist. These countries are they're kind of like the United States Walmart, if you will. They're there to incentivize people to come and get very low-priced goods, except these are low-taxed assets. In the United States, like I've seen proposals in France, we would be in favor, a lot of us, of closing loopholes, broadening the corporate tax base by eliminating a lot of tax expenditures, and that to me seems to be a much better idea than making our tax system more progressive. Whether you have a Keynesian outlook or not, I think it's something that we all might agree on.
Which means, for our viewers, stimulating the economy with more spending.
No, it actually means, if you're considering a tax expenditure spending, it actually means less spending. What it means in the tax expenditure code is more revenue. The top tax expenditure in the United States is for employer deduction of health insurance, and that costs us about $180 billion a year. So getting rid of that over a 4-year period yields about $500 to $600 billion, which is definitely a significant amount of revenue.
All right, David Logan, from speaking to us from Washington, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all our guests for joining us here on set this evening to talk about that and the super rich crying out to pay more taxes. We'll continue to follow this issue on France 24, of course.